Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome to my blog today. The title is Setting Attainable and Meaningful Goals. A lot of people today don't set goals. Something like 97% of people don't set goals. The most common reason I hear for not setting goals is that people say, well, when I set goals, I seem not to accomplish them, so it just becomes so frustrating I stop setting goals. I understand the frustration, but I must also say that based on the science of goal setting, most of the time when I look at people's goals, they're not following the science of goal setting, and they're setting either too many goals or unrealistically achievable goals, which just leads to frustration. So in the resources that I'll explain are available to you later, I have a course on goal setting just to help you get clear on the science of goal setting so that you're more likely to stick to your goals, because there is a lot to goal setting to actually know how to do it effectively. I begin each of my years, as some of you may have seen on my blog on the web at paulcheksblog.com, with a mandala. So this is my mandala description of my goals for the year, but it's done in a right brain artistic format, and this expresses the unconscious elements of myself, where the left brain written goals are what we would call the conscious elements. So this serves as an artistic expression of what wants to rise out of me when I put my intention on the year 2015 or whatever year it is. And this represents Dr. Happiness and the air element, Dr. Movement, the fire element, Dr. Diet, the earth element, and Dr. Quiet, or the water element. And this represents space, or the element of ether. And this represents how all of these interact with each other within me. And this year I painted an artesian well, which is water that comes out of the ground on its own power, which means working with nature, not trying to force things to happen, and it's bubbling up naturally and beautifully. So that's a quick explanation of why I use the artistic expression of goal setting, and now we will talk about the more, shall we say, left brain aspects of it, which, as you will see, require participation from the right brain. And the key thing for getting right brain participation is a magic word that's really missing in our culture, which is relaxation. The right hemisphere works well when there's not high stress hormone levels. As stress hormone levels rise up, we fall into the left brain, which is the brain of doing what you've always done. And as Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Most people's goals are just recapitulations of last year's mistakes because they're strictly working from the left brain and avoiding the information of the right brain about wholeness and how things connect to each other. So with that said, I'll give you a quick tour of the structure by how I set goals for myself in hopes that it can be useful to you and maybe give you some different ways of looking at your own life and your own experience. Dr. Happiness relates to the air element. Air is something that's highly charged. It's positive or yang, and air carries the vibrations of our words. So when we're speaking, we're putting our intention behind our words. It makes everything vibrate in space, and therefore we express ourselves to others through the air. The key thing to remember about the air element is the little saying, attitude determines altitude. So how we go about our day, how we emote within ourselves determines, shall we say, our view. Our altitude gives us view. A lifeguard sits above everyone so they can see what's going on. So if your goals and your way of living are keeping you down at a low level in the air element, you're always going to be, shall we say, stuck between trees and things that are getting in the way. Dr. Happiness relates to your overarching dream. So what is your overarching dream for the year? I choose to become this physically, or I choose to grow my business to this size, or I choose to grow my family, etc. What would you like to happen, or do you choose to happen for your year? If you don't have an overarching dream, which is called a legacy. An overarching dream as a legacy means the goal for your life, which we work towards each year, because each year is a component of our life. Then you want to look for what your chief goal or objective is for the year. So it might be a financial goal or objective, or something physical, like I said, but it may not necessarily be something that you can perceive as a yearly project, a more local project, we would say. But whatever you know for sure you need to do at the beginning of the year now is worth practicing goal setting for, because usually as we accomplish one goal, our clarity and vision toward what we need to do next becomes enhanced. If you're not sure what your overarching dream for the year is, and you don't even know what your goal or chief objective is for the year, it's always wise to look at what your chief nightmare is. The nightmare, as I use the term in goal setting, relates to the one thing or challenge that, if addressed or removed, would open the flow of your life force energy, your creative energy, or your spirit optimally. And most people that I coach have some kind of a nightmare in the way, whether it be health problems, money problems, relationship problems, etc. So looking at the nightmare could be the most potent thing that you can do this year, because if you focus your energies on that one thing, your whole life can usually change quite significantly. When it comes to Dr. Quiet, we look at the water element. Quiet relates to water because water settles toward the center of the earth, and if water is not empowered by some force, gravity pulls water down, or it wouldn't even go down, so there's a gravitational force. If we use wind, water will move, etc. You can vibrate water, whatever, but there's always something moving water. So quiet and water go together. In this context, water also is something that creates solution and dilution. So the water element connects to Dr. Quiet because when we're in a state of introspection or meditation, it helps us bring things into solution that seem rigid or stuck in our lives. Salt crystals are hard. They relate to the earth element. So if your challenges in your life or your nightmare are solidified and you seem stuck, then going into introspection and meditation activates the psychic water element, which begins to bring clarity and dissolve things into component parts so that you have time in introspection to get more clarity on your life. The habit of most people is that the more stuck they get, the more wound up they get, the less introspective they get, and usually the more of a pain in the ass they become to everybody around them, because we get all these poor me, I woulda, shoulda, coulda, didn't type stories going on, and that can get old for everybody involved. Okay? So under Dr. Quiet, we want to look at total, active, and passive rest, and we want to look at the day, week, month, year structure. Remember, the day, 24 hours of a day, is the functional building block of a week, a month, or a year. So it's extremely important, from my perspective as a therapist who's coached uncountable numbers of people through challenges in their life, to remember that any mistake that you make in your day will multiply itself by 7, by 30, or by 365. And this is particularly important for those of you that are athletes, because most of the mistakes that an athlete makes that get them injured are happening on a daily basis. So periodization above and beyond the day, when the day is dysfunctional, becomes a magnification of dysfunction and nothing else. Total rest relates to sleep and doing nothing, literally giving yourself permission to do nothing, which in our culture is extremely rare, and I myself took a long time to learn how to take a day or two, like a weekend, and just do nothing. Do nothing doesn't mean laying still and just staring at a wall. It means having no plan and allowing whatever rises up in you to happen, but without putting any kind of schedule stress or outcome pressures on yourself. If you want to lay there and watch TV, do it. If you want to go out and lay in the sun, do it. If you want to do a piece of art, do it. If you want to go fishing, do it. But get rid of your watch. That's my idea. See, it's gone. That took years to get rid of. Okay, active rest means doing something that relates to your primary activity. So if you're an athlete and you're a distance runner, then active rest would be running at a much reduced intensity. If you're a business person, active rest might mean having a shortened day. So for a long time I cut Fridays out of my schedule. I still came to work, but I did catch-up work. So that would be a way of taking pressure off of myself so that I could do a better job Monday through Thursday because I didn't feel all this back pressure on me. So there's active rest for a business person. Passive rest is doing something other than your chosen activity as a form of rest. So for the business person, that might mean taking the staff out. We recently did a go-kart racing day where we all went out together and raced go-karts. Another time we went out and did kayak training, flatwater or ocean canoe training, and then we did races that way. So that was certainly exercise and physical, but it was an active, or excuse me, a passive rest from the primary task of work at the office. An athlete, for example, the distance runner who runs at a much reduced intensity on their active rest days, on a passive rest day might go swimming because it's a completely different pattern of movement with different stressors that usually won't erode their running performance. So we want to apply these concepts in our goal setting because otherwise we run the great risk of either burning ourselves out or not getting enough done to feel good about ourselves as the year progresses. Dr. Quiet is your chief resource for anabolic energy. Remember, sleep is free and it's the most powerful healing agent there is, in my opinion. Without it, you have a very little likelihood of healing well from anything, no matter how many doctors you're seeing or how many magical pills you're consuming. So your goal structure needs to be very, very carefully oriented around being honest with yourself about how much rest you need. And instead of telling yourself, I don't have time, or making excuses, I don't have the money, know that you will have time when you're sick, and you will lose a lot of money by being sick, and that the quality of your life and the thought processes that you experience will be likely to be much more negative as you run out of energy, and you're likely to spend a lot more money on quick fixes and stimulants and things like that. Introspection and meditation goes into Dr. Quiet because if we don't have time to introspect, to review our day, to review any given period of goal setting and look at ourselves honestly and objectively and say, where could I have done better or where do I need to make changes, then we have a tendency to just repeat the same mistakes over and over in our daily life, and that leads to Groundhog Day. Okay? Dr. Movement relates to fire. Fire is the element of transformation. If you put water on fire, it starts to move and change. It goes, you can take a piece of ice, throw it in a pot. Under the influence of fire, the ice will go from a solid to a liquid, and if you continue that transformative process, the heat will turn the liquid into a gas, and at that point it becomes the air element. So what we want to remember is that how we apply the concept of fire under the heading of Dr. Movement has everything to do with how efficiently we accomplish our goals, whether or not we have enough resources to burn. In other words, if you're not getting enough rest, you will be burned out, so there's nothing for the fire to burn. So we always want to be very, very conscious that fire is very useful. It makes things move and transforms things, but it requires resources to maintain. And we can easily and often do burn ourselves out, which is why adrenal exhaustion is one of the most common ailments that physicians see people for worldwide today. Your adrenals relate to the water system, but as I said, Dr. Quiet is the basis of energy accumulation, without which you have nothing to manifest fire from. Fire means you're spending energy. It had to come from somewhere. So what in your life do you need to take action on or get movement on, and do you need exercise? So movement and exercise are essential for the health of the body, as I'm sure if you're watching this video blog by me, you probably are aware of. What do you need more of or less of when it comes to action in order to achieve your chief goal for the year? What needs to be transformed in your life? If you're not making enough money, then you have to look at how you're going to transform the situation. Are you spending money on things that are meaningless with regard to achieving your goal? Are you in the habit of being so busy that you don't have time to do the things that you need to do, which would mean that you're ineffectively investing the energy into fire, but you've got fires all around you, none of which are contributing to the overarching dream goal or to removing your nightmare? Dr. Diet relates to the earth element. The earth element relates to things that contain or hold or have some degree of rigidity in their structure. A tree holds energy, holds fruit, has some degree of rigidity in its structure, or it would just blow down. A house, that represents the earth element, your body structure, your bones and connective tissues. Those are all aspects of the earth element. Whenever we have too much earth building up in our life, it starts to confine us. We feel constricted in our space, whether that space be in the house. If a house is too full of furniture, it confines you. If your life is too full of things, you feel confined, and anything that gets to be rigid, or you hear words like, I have to do this, or I have to do that, you could say has now reached a level of the earth element has become rigid. And there's certain aspects of our life that it's okay to have rigid. Like it's fairly a good idea to have something moving towards rigid as far as clarity on what your ideal structure for your day is. I'm fairly rigid, for example, about not coaching people before 10 o'clock in the morning because I have other things that I need to do for myself, such as introspection and meditation, and without that, I really don't have much fire to share with other people. So there are positive applications of making things rigid. The 12 numbers on your clock are fairly rigid. Imagine if they just kept moving around. You would never know what time it is. But if you're always racing to get to appointments that you don't need to get to because you're going to see people for help with things that could have easily been managed intelligently by just planning effectively, then those rigidities get in the way. If you're rigid with your belief systems, that's a problem. If you're rigid with how you handle money and the environment's changing, that can be a problem. So all of these elements have a positive and a negative correlation in our life. When it comes to Dr. Quiet, the earth element, look at what you're consuming. And look at that from a body perspective, an emotional perspective, and thoughts. Remember, the body feeds on food. So whenever the body's not healthy or balanced, we have to ask ourselves, what are we feeding our body at the physical level? The emotional body feeds on emotions. So if we're hanging out with people that are stressful to us, or we're around people that are too negative, then we can fall into the trap of a diet of negative emotions. Negative emotions naturally produce negative thoughts. Thoughts come from the mind, and the mind feeds on thoughts. So positive thoughts is a good diet for the mind. Dream affirmative thoughts and self-affirmative thoughts are a good diet for the mind. But dream or self-negating thoughts are junk food for the mind, which trigger off emotions that reflect that, and that usually results in food and drink choices that are actually embodying our negative thoughts or emotions. So you can see that when it comes to Dr. Diet, we have to not only see diet as food, but we have to look at the fact that we have to balance all three of these, because a virus in any one of these essentially poisons the other. Good food may not heal negative emotions or thoughts, and lots of people that eat good food get diseases and have screwed up relationships and have challenging relationships with themselves. So by having a goal structure and being clear about where you're going and who you're becoming, you have a reason to focus your thoughts on dream affirmative thoughts. which produces dream affirmative emotions, and you also have a reason to be aware that maybe your nightmare is coming from your own fixation, overly earthing rigid ideas, and maybe your pain is because nature is trying to show you where you're obstructing the natural flow of life force energy in your life. Space, the fifth element, relates to ether, which is your potential. We all have unlimited potential. You can play with that one however you want to, but many of the people that say, oh, I'll never be able to, are negating the fact that if any other human being can do it, then you probably can too. So with regard to space, what do I need more or less room for in my life? That's a very, very important question, because all these elements require space to function in. Physical space or mental space, or even emotional space, if you will. In this regard, you might say, well, you know, which relationships are really not serving me anymore? Maybe I spend too much time on the phone with my mom or my dad listening to their negative stuff. Maybe it's my brothers and sisters. Maybe it's hanging out with coworkers that have a negative disposition, and that's clogging up my inner space or your inner space. Look at that from a physical, emotional, and a mental perspective, and you'll probably see that wherever there's a space challenge, it's going to connect to one or more of these other goal structures or energy structures above it. So now let's look at a few tips that relate to each of these components as far as it relates to goal setting. So your tips, number one, your resources are PPS Success Mastery Lesson 1, 2, and 3, which are far more comprehensive than I can do on even 20 blogs, really. They're designed to be legitimate inner explorations to help you identify where you're stuck and to teach you what you need to know to set your own life up and your own dreams up and know where your own roadblocks to success are. So PPS Lesson 1 looks at goal setting and what is your dream. PPS Lesson 2 is all about how to manage yourself and how the brain is programmed to behave in given ways, or the science of brainwashing. And I teach you how to use that science to literally wash your brain of a lot of the things that become obstructions to your natural flow. PPS Lesson 3 is goal setting, so there's lots in there on this and, of course, much more. So when it comes to Dr. Happiness, effective goal setting, be realistic. In goal setting, the science of goal setting, we have what's called the 50% rule. Generally speaking, it's not wise to set a goal for any given year or block of time that's greater than 50% of what you've objectively achieved in the previous block of time or year. So if last year you made $50,000, it wouldn't be wise to set a goal of making 50% more than that this year, or it becomes less likely to be achieved. Now, some of you are going to say, well, that seems pretty narrow. What about potential? That doesn't mean that you won't earn more than that, or you won't accomplish more than 50%. It just means that based on the science of goal setting and looking at thousands of people that do set goals, people who set goals higher than 50% of their most recent objective achievement are more likely not to succeed in their goals. You can always upgrade your goals at any time, just like a business plan. It shouldn't be static. So if you made $50,000 last year and your goal was to make $75,000 this year, but you made $175,000, hallelujah, you can just keep patting yourself on the back. But if you say, I want to be a millionaire next year, then you may find 6 months into it when you only have $60,000 of income that you're not even close. So it can be unnecessarily deflating because it wasn't a scientific way to set the goal, is what I'm saying. Remove or address the chief resistance first. So whatever the chief obstacle to you accomplishing your stated dream, goal, or objective, look at that first. If it's a nightmare for you, then it needs to be first on top of your first, because it's first. How's that for a pun? Okay? Always assess Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Diet components. Many people set goals without actually asking themselves the question, do I have the inner resources or the financial resources? Do I have the time, the energy, the money, the willingness, and do I need any specific equipment or support to accomplish this objective? That is essential at every step of goal setting. Time, energy, money, willingness, and equipment availability or additional needs. When it comes to Dr. Quiet and the water element, remember, rest is more valuable than money when tired. And I can assure you that. I've had very wealthy people that own homes all over the place and professional athletes who told me, looked me right in the eye and said that they were concerned with my program because they could not afford organic food. I had a guy one time pull into my driveway, a professional athlete, making lots and lots of money a year, millions. Pulls up in a $150,000 Carrera S4, and lo and behold, when I break out his new program for him and he sees organic food, he starts complaining about the price of organic food, says he can't afford it. And I said, well, where's all your money going? This particular person, I believe, was making about $4 million a year. Well, when he listed out how many cars he had, how many homes he had, and how many people he was doling out money to, he was literally a guy that looked rich on the outside, but really was as broke as the next guy. So, as I said to him, you'd be far better off to sell that car and eat it every year than to drive it, and that's realistic. So we have to look very carefully into these things, or we can, shall we say, spend ourselves into a trap. We can be a rich-looking poor person, and that's usually stressful because much of that richness comes on monthly payments, and when they all add up, you can find yourself having to work so hard you can never get out from under it, no matter how much money you're making. Okay? So look at quiet, movement, and diet as it relates to all these goals. Rest is more important than money when tired. Dr. Quiet also equals time with self. You can't get to know who you are if you don't spend time with yourself, and here's a key point. If you don't spend enough time to really get to know who you are, you're very likely to think that all the problems in your life are someone else's fault. Remember, we're 50% of every relationship we have, so it is up to us as adults to manage our 50%. And sometimes the best thing we can do with our 50% is disengage it from key relationships. We have to look honestly at why we stay in relationships, many of which are painful. So there's something inside of us that we might say is needy or fearful or codependent, which you'll never identify if you don't spend time with yourself looking into these types of things, which is what PPS Lesson 1 really does quite well for you. Okay? How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy has questionnaires and identifies where your stress levels are high. So in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, you fill out the questionnaires and it gives you a charted out score sheet of where you're challenged in your body or mind, including a chapter on stress and a column on stress. So once you see where you're at, then you get clear directions as to how to go about making those changes in order to balance yourself. So when it comes to quiet, you are going to have a hard time with introspection and meditation if your stress levels are high, because your stress hormones are going to be high, so your whole system's going to be wound up all the time. So you're going to be living what Zig Ziglar would call a ready, fire, aim approach to life. I'll repeat that. Ready, fire, aim. Bad news. Okay? Next, we're going to look at movement and the fire element. Remember, the turtle always outruns the rabbit. That's an old teaching story. Rabbits zigzag, stop and start, and go all over the place, like somebody that's manic. The turtle represents someone who's very consistent. They may not go very fast, but they know where they're going. They know when they're there and what they're going to do to both get there and when they are there. So it's far better to live like a turtle in this metaphor than it is to live like a rabbit. And when it comes to movement, we're talking about being consistent with how we apply our energy in our action phase of each goal cycle. Next, with movement, we want to establish healthy rhythms. Movement is its functional antagonist is rest. So you have movement, yang, rest, yin, and everything in the universe oscillates between those two states, as the Tai Chi symbol clearly signifies or symbolizes. So as I said earlier, if your daily rhythm is stressful, well, naturally you're going to have a stressful week, month, or year. So as I've stated earlier today, most of our real work when it comes to setting up our rhythms and the use of our energy under the heading of movement is seen in the encapsulation of one day. You show me any one day of most people, and I can pretty much predict what their week, month, or year is going to manifest in most aspects of their life, because when you look at people for a living for 30 years, you start to see patterns, and they're not hard to see. Okay? Now down to diet and the earth element. Look at the food vitality relative to toxicity, because your food vitality and toxicity ultimately equals you. One of the ways I'm able to do as many things as I do and create as many things as I have and do all the work I do all over the world and even these blogs is because I eat food that gives me a high degree of vitality and minimum toxicity so that my energy can be utilized moving toward my dream goals and objectives, as opposed to running around to doctors, therapists, or staring at the wall going, because my brain doesn't work. Okay? Remember, who's hungry? That's a big question. Is it your body that's hungry? Is it your emotions that are hungry? Or is it your mind that is hungry? Oftentimes, when it comes to fueling our bodies effectively to meet our dreams, goals, and objectives effectively, many people have body problems because they keep on eating after they're not hungry, or they're eating things that aren't really food and they don't know why they're doing it. So a general way to identify where your hunger is coming from is if your body's not hungry anymore, but you have this urge to keep eating, it is often that the individual does not spend enough time inside themselves in introspection and meditation to really feel, is it something that I'm emotionally in need of? Maybe that what you're eating actually is a symbol of your lack of connection to yourself. Maybe it's a symbol of needing more love and affection and relationships, but not realizing that you have to give to get. So therefore you could be eating to fill an emotional empty spot, or it could be a mental empty spot. Anxiety and fear burn a lot of energy. So people that have fear-based thinking and fear-based living and negative self-talk often end up trying to nourish themselves at the mental level or emotional level with food that creates biochemical changes that lead to a false sense of joy or a false sense of momentary security, but in the long run actually erode their body, their energy, and their resources to the point that they're ineffective at not only goal setting, but having a spiritual practice of growing themselves as a person. And finally, when it comes down to space, remember, time cannot be managed, only activities can be managed. Earl Nightingale does a beautiful job of talking about that in his teachings. We all have 24 hours a day. How we use that boils down to what activities do we participate in throughout the day. And to make my point very clear, that the national average in the West for television watching is 4.7 hours a day. So oftentimes people feel they don't have time in their day or space to do the things they should be doing, but somehow they have time to watch almost 5 hours of television a day. So we have to be very, very honest in witnessing ourselves, and we have to be very clear in which activities actually are meaningful in contributing to our overarching dream, goal, or objective, or our stated goal or objective, or which activities are going to be most effective at, shall we say, healing or transforming our nightmare into something positive. So those are some tips for you. This goal structure system is found in my The Last 4 Doctors Will Ever Need How to Get Healthy Now multimedia ebook, and is presented as values. So I show you how to establish your values. Your values really become your goal. A value is the goal that you want to live. So I value organic food. My goal is to eat organic food. Again, PPS Success Mastery Lessons 1, 2, and 3 take you much deeper. If you want to be supported by me, personally, you can do it. These lessons are very, very comprehensive. There's videos that have my slideshows, audios, workbooks, very comprehensive. Thousands of people have had great results using these things, and it gives you a very expensive therapist for a very reasonable price to help you get clear and achieve your dreams, goals, objectives, and transform nightmares. And remember, if we want the world to be a better place, then the best place to start is right here. Because once you've changed this piece of real estate inside yourself, you have changed the world. That's a guarantee, and that's the one place we all have to start. Because if we can't handle the problems of ourselves, we certainly aren't going to be fueled or intelligent enough or clear enough to handle the problems of relationships with others or the world itself. So thanks for joining me. I look forward to sharing more with you soon.